Hello, everyone. This is Gideon Fiddleside, VP Haymarket Studios and Editorial Director Custom at PR Week. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's webcast strategy session, Protect Your Brand from Manipulated Narratives. Before I go any further, allow me to thank Blackbird.AI for sponsoring this event. Social listening. It has become a table stakes function for comms pros, but what it takes to do so effectively has totally changed. And many traditional social listening tools are not designed to uncover the myriad serious narrative attacks your organization can face today, ones that target executives, crash markets, and cancel the world's leading brands. And the volume and velocity of these attacks is unprecedented. Simply put, you need a more sophisticated approach to deal with these manipulated narratives. And that's why we're here today. That's why you're here today. And that's why these next 60 minutes will be so beneficial to all of you. We're going to really drill into the ways AI transforms the landscape of narrative intelligence. We're going to help you recognize blind spots that are preventing you from uncovering these harmful narratives that are so prevalent on the dark web, on news sites, social media, and more. Our ultimate goal with today's webinar, to equip you with strategies that will improve your ability to both protect and enhance your brands and your clients' brands, for agencies out there, reputation. And I could not be more confident that this webcast will indeed do all of that. Why am I so confident? Well, 3 reasons. Our trio of amazing leaders who are joining us today to lend their vast expertise on this crucial matter. It is my honor to bring them into the conversation now. In alphabetical order, Katrina Cabrera, Senior Director of Communications at Verizon, Amisha Durham, Director of Corporate Digital and Content at Nestlé US, and Wasim Khaled, CEO and co-founder of Blackbird.AI. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today.
Great to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Now, before we get into our discussion, there are some housekeeping notes I have to share with all of you. A major portion of today's session will be the dialogue between myself, Katrina, Amisha, and Wasim, but you, our audience, have a key role as well. Final few minutes of this webcast will be dedicated to answering your questions. There is a Q&A tab on your screen. Please send in your questions throughout this webcast. I will remind you from time to time. We will be monitoring them as they come in, and we'll pose as many of them to our speakers as time will allow. I will also note that there will be 2 polls shared with you today, one during the webcast, one immediately after it in an exit poll. Please take them both. For the exit poll, anyone who answers that will be put into a drawing to win a $100 Amazon gift card courtesy of Blackbird.AI. Of course, I welcome you all to communicate on X during the webinar. I finally stopped saying Twitter. It took me 2 years. We want to be trending. X handles are at Blackbird_AI and at PR Week US. Now, I'm sure you're all ready to hear from our leaders. I know I am too. So without further ado, let's get into the meat of our conversation. Wasim, I'm going to start with you. And I want to start with the question that really sets the stage for what we're going to be talking about today. What is a narrative? How does a narrative become manipulated and harmful? And just how big is the problem? I guess that was 3 questions, but the stage is yours, Wasim.
Thank you. All right. So, yeah, we can dig right into it. So, obviously, talking to this audience, everyone has an idea generally of what a narrative has or how people have thought about narratives over the past several decades. But today, in the information ecosystem, you have to think about a narrative as any kind of assertion that shapes perception about a person, place, or thing across all digital media. And particularly, you have to think about a narrative in a way of something that can create or destroy value. So if we think about a positive narrative, which is really what every brand and organization wants out there, this can create value for you if you're generating, say, a groundswell of support, right? Good sentiments towards the organization. And people have looked primarily at positive narratives for the past decade with social listening tools. But what we need today is more akin to narrative intelligence, because a harmful narrative can really do the opposite. And it's not just about sentiment. A single post can target an executive, company, or an entire market, and it can cause massive financial and reputational harm. The thing that everyone has to really understand is that these kinds of harmful narratives, what we call a narrative attack, is a tradecraft. From a threat intelligence or security standpoint, billions have been spent building tradecraft that can drive harmful narratives that can completely destroy reputation. So brands really face an entirely new threat vector of risk from these harmful narrative attacks that are manipulating public perception, destabilizing stock prices and entire markets, and eroding stakeholder trust, and it can happen within minutes. Add to that the fact that in the last several years, AI generated narratives, synthetic media, and deepfakes are being used to fabricate everything from press releases to forging executive communications on text and video, or even to stage completely false crisis. This has left organizations with a very big blind spot, a massive gap that they're now scrambling to respond to in real time, where the old methods of social listening and human analysis just fall very, very short. And so you want to really think about this as a new form of brand risk to companies, where they're not able to see any of the tradecraft that are driving those harmful narratives. And for that matter, to be able to really see and monitor authentic, positive narratives. So the problem is massive. It's only going to get bigger with some of the AI tools that are in the hands of threat actors that are out there today. And you see the headlines regularly, whether it's in CPG or healthcare and pharma, banks, or targeting of CEOs and executives. So it is a whole new world, and you need a new class of tools and technology to deal with.
Wasim, thank you for that. And it's amazing. For a while now, communicators have always dealt with the reality that there's a lot of external parties that can control their narratives. But what you just said takes that to raises it 1,000-fold, 10,000-fold. It's almost a little scary. I am sure there are a lot of people out there, Katrina and Amisha, as comms leaders of brands themselves, probably like, yeah, we deal with this all the time. It's something that it consumes so much of our time today, no doubt. So that's why Wasim just perfectly captured why this conversation is so important. So I'm so glad we're having it. I'm also very, very glad that Amisha and Katrina are here, because I'm going to bring you guys into the conversation now. You both represent large, well-known, and I would say pretty well-liked brands for the most part. And obviously, you're both in very important positions at those companies. So I know our audience will benefit if you could share examples or experiences of how harmful narratives have impacted your organization or other brands in the industry, because I know you're observers of communications even outside of your own walls. So, you know, I guess I'm going to start with Amisha, because I'm sort of on this alphabetical order thing today. So, Amisha, I guess you'll go first.
Yeah, awesome. And I'd love to chime in. And even without naming a specific brand, I think just as you hear me sort of give a broader example, you will say, yeah, I've seen that. Really, today, harmful narratives can come from many places, but perhaps the most prevalent and challenging places it comes from is like when they are fueled by disinformation. You can see a creator led viral video take off like wildfire within 24 hours before the brand can even get a hold of it. And as Wasim mentioned, with the rise of Gen AI, that is only exacerbated. And so, whereas even 2, 3, 5 years ago, you're just seeing, a blip on the radar on Twitter, now X, for 24, 48 hours. Now, crisis comm teams are having to look at, are we talking about just reputation impact, or is this going further to impact value, in which it has? And we've seen this with, the slew of boycotts that it feels like every week there's probably a different one that's happening. And so I think while you can't for sure predict all of the risks that you will face today across the many platforms today, the key is really proactive crisis planning. Whereas before, investing in reputation management, sure, it was important, but this is a huge part of the comms work that we do as professionals now. You really do have to have the right listening tools. And I would even say a proactive crisis comm plans that plays out a multitude of scenarios, because it's to the point made at the top of the call, of it needing a sophisticated approach. Not all bad narratives should be, managed the same. There are some bad narratives that you can turn into something that's opportunistic. You've seen brands go in and whether they've messed up on a product or opinions shift, they found ways to turn that into something opportunistic. And there are other times where it truly is a bad narrative that you need to approach maybe in partnership with your security team or through a press release. But if you don't do the pre-work of mapping that out, it's going to be hard to make decisions in near real time because that's what it requires when the crisis happened. So yeah, bad narratives today can come from anywhere, and you just have to be ready for. You got to be ready to take action and make decisions quickly.
Thank you for that, Amisha. And, I'm actually really glad you mentioned security experts as well, because a lot of conversations lately that I'm hearing and having with communicators, communicators work with all different arms of organizations, HR, legal, whatever, IT. Now, I've heard more and more about how they have to become really, really close with the security teams now. And that's just an unfortunate reality of today's communications function. But it is what it is. And of course, Katrina knows a heck of a lot more about it than I do because she's a terrific communicator herself. So I want to give you an opportunity to talk about this as well, Katrina. So be my guest.
Yeah, sure. There are a couple examples that I'll cite that, thankfully didn't turn into a major impact for brands, but I think can just give people a sense of, how quickly these things can pop up. My background is in corporate communications for a lot of advertising agencies. So I do follow a lot of the marketing trades. And recently, a large fast food chain had an incident where it was posted on their social media accounts that they had fired the agency that they were working with. It was disparaging remarks about said agency, sort of ricocheted around the industry, ended up getting picked up in the Wall Street Journal and some others. Obviously, that's not actually how anything like that would go down. It was a fake situation, still being investigated. But that's the sort of thing that can be completely unexpected, that if you don't have proactive monitoring in place, like we've been talking about, that can, turn into a much bigger issue. I think here at Verizon, we deal with different things all the time. A recent example in the past election cycle was another one that, thanks to social monitoring, we were able to catch pretty quickly. But there were some, disparaging messages about different political figures. There was an image that was being shared on some social media channels of disparaging messages being projected on the side of a building with Verizon branding that was not real. However, obviously, the election cycle is a very polarizing time. There are people who grab onto that sort of thing, amplify it, et cetera. And it happened around like 4 a.m. So if we weren't actively monitoring around the clock, it's not something that we would have been able to catch quickly. And again, I think with social media, sometimes we assume that there's a level of common sense there where it's like, of course, a brand like Verizon is not going to be proactively generating this type of content. A brand like, a major fast food chain is not going to end an important relationship via social media. But we just can't assume that there is common sense on social media. And so you do have to be prepared to address these situations as quickly as possible so that they don't turn into something larger.
Yeah, you're so right, Katrina. Unfortunately, common sense is not something that we can assume anymore among the broader consumer base, I suppose. And a lot of it is because emotion drives so much of what consumers do today, perhaps more than ever. That emotion and common sense don't always meet. I know that personally. Anyway, but I appreciate all of that. Now, everyone out there, you have already gotten a taste of how smart these three people are. So send in your questions for them because I'm sure if you do, they'll have some good answers for you. But let's go back to our regularly scheduled program. Now, Wasim, I want to go back to you because I'm kind of excited about this one because in our conversations ahead of today's webcast, you mentioned a very specific scenario that I want to talk about. You mentioned the possibility of a $50 million advertising campaign getting crushed by a $50,000 narrative attack. Now think about that. 50 million, 50,000. That's a scary proposition. So could you lay out this scenario a bit more and then tell us what can be done to help brands protect against this kind of a manipulated narrative situation?
Yeah, I mean, for us, that kind of a delta between dollars spent on goodwill versus how little you need to spend to crush all of that goodwill almost overnight is kind of a regular thing. I mean, you could actually add zeros to those numbers and have similar results, which I think we could probably think of a few of those examples in the last year or two. I think the most important thing to understand is you can spend years building an incredible reputation or goodwill. But if there's an opportunistic threat actor, and I shouldn't say if, like in today's world, there's always an opportunistic threat actor that's looking to have some form of financial or reputational gain on the backs of, say the Fortune 500, Global 2000s. They can essentially spend very little to manipulate how the information ecosystem reacts to what a company was perceived doing. This is a great example you just mentioned here. Doesn't matter if a brand would totally roast a relationship online through some sort of imagery or campaign. What do people want to believe during that particular reactive cycle in what is happening in the world? So we always think of this concept of these like super nodes of attention. So there are things that happen in the world today where everybody's looking. And when everybody's looking, you can inject something to hijack that big event and then create almost like a lightning rod of attack to the entity that you attached to it, right? So if there's a pandemic going on and you want to attach a healthcare company to it, it could be something as simple as an HR policy that they might post. And it's the context of that narrative that can do all the damage. And so social listening was a way to understand what people are mentioning and maybe general sentiment, but it misses all of these, flashing red signals that proactive narrative intelligence actually gives you. So getting specific here, how do you avoid a relatively low-cost narrative attack subverting an entire year-long marketing campaign? Right? Massive dollars lost in this kind of attack, in this narrative attack. So you have to be able to identify narratives and, more importantly, manipulated narratives very early in the arc. So we're talking about proactive detection here. So how do you track a harmful or manipulated narrative at inception, particularly on less regulated platforms, let's say, fringe forums, dark web, things of that nature? How do you then detect the types of things that businesses can use to actually get decision dominance in a critical situation before those harmful or manipulated narratives gain traction? And by the way, I keep saying manipulated. We're not talking about just people talking. We're talking about tradecraft, right? So these could be deploying programmatic bot networks. It could be deploying generative AI or deepfakes with the intention of causing some sort of brand harm, short selling on a stock, slowing down a merger and acquisition. We've seen all of those things in order for someone to have some sort of gain on the other side. So to be able to understand how to get ahead of this, you have to understand intention within the data quantitatively, right? And so narrative intelligence really, almost you could think of it as analyzing the underlying intent and the threat actor groups that are actually driving these kind of orchestrated attacks. And so maybe another way to think about it is, there are 10 narratives about my organization today around this topic. Which groups are amplifying them? Are they starting to converge, which is going to create like a powder keg scenario and give you those insights into the motivations? So the other thing you'll have to think about is monitoring across many different platforms. So narratives, they evolve across many different platforms, from niche to the big ones. And so you have to have almost a narrative map of these kind of journeys of these harmful narratives so that you can understand when to interject, or if it's, say, a bot network, you might want to stay away from it altogether because it's actually not your audiences that have these kind of, say, boycott-like chatter. Maybe that's completely generated to make your organization have a reaction that the threat actor wanted you to have. So these are just some of the things I think in a new world that people really have to really understand to be able to then amplify positive narratives and goodwill narratives to maintain those kinds of campaigns that they were actually doing that big spend against, to avoid being hijacked in a scenario that they could have avoided. And just as some examples, we've seen deepfake videos on fringe platforms before they gain traction, so people could understand that it's coming. You understand that origin and intent, and you can, say, put out a press release or a transparent public statement with media outlets to kind of pre-bunk something that might be coming, to protect that executive. Or it could be about a product. Get ahead of something that someone might say about a product that is a group that specifically wants to hit that organization. And the key thing here is it's about same old thing, different threat surface, but it's about being proactive, protecting your reputation, reassuring your stakeholders, investors, partners, maintaining that trust and loyalty, but being able to do that quantitatively against an entirely new adversary.
I really appreciate that, Wasim, because I think one of the most important things that we always want to get out of these webcasts is to have our listeners really understand about the things that they need to be thinking about now. You just laid out a bunch of them, and I think that's really, really important. You can't solve a problem unless you think about it and really understand what it is first. Jeff Daniels said that in his speech, by the way, in the newsroom. It wasn't me, but it was a good quote, so I want to give him credit for that.
It's important to note that it's not about damage control, right? This is about getting far ahead of that damage control, because some of these things can be company killers. And if we're talking about security a little bit more later, we can get into it then. But even the biggest brands have faced tens of billions of dollars worth of damage from narratives, and that was unheard of, say, 10 years ago.
No, absolutely. And that's also why it's so important for communicators to not be reactive all the time. It's really important to be proactive. And that's just as a great example of that. I'm going to give the three of you just a little bit of a break now, because I said in the beginning, guys out there in our audience, that I was going to have a poll question for you. Well, here it comes. So it's going to be on our screen in a minute. There it is. I'll give you about 30 seconds. Please take this, and we'll be back to our conversation in a minute. Okay, just a couple more seconds. Okay. Well, thank you all for doing that. A bunch of you took that. I very much appreciate that. By the way, we also have some questions coming in for the audience that we're going to get to towards the end of this conversation. So thank you for that. Please keep sending them in. And now let's go back to our regularly scheduled programming here. So we touched on this just a tiny bit, but now we're going to get into it a little bit more deeply. A subject that has unfortunately really risen to the forefront as of late are manipulated narratives that specifically target executives. These could be in the form of deepfakes, perhaps other dangerous forms many in our audience are not even aware of. So I actually want to bring all three of you into this now, and I want each of you to chime in here and share whatever counsel you can on A, how big of a problem do you think this is for brands today? And B, how are you or would you deal with such a situation should it arise? Not going in alpha order this time. So Amisha, you can go. Whew. Katrina, I'm going to start with you on this one.
All right. Well, look, I think as far as how big the problem is, it is a problem, right? But it's always been a problem, whether it's been letter writing campaigns or protests or boycotts. These things have always been tools that bad actors can leverage. What we've been talking about is how social media, AI, all of that escalates the problem greatly and escalates the speed with which these things can transpire and that you have to respond. So I would say the most important thing, which Amisha spoke to earlier, is just being prepared. Thinking through the scenarios, knowing who the stakeholders are that you would need to loop in should different things happen, knowing who decides, who ultimately is making the call on how you respond, if you respond, what that response should look like, is crucial ahead of time. That's not the sort of thing that you want to be scrambling to figure out in the moment. And again, another tool that can help you do that is, to reiterate, the monitoring. Watching conversations closely on social media, making sure that anything suspicious or concerning is flagged for deeper analysis. And that's not just across X and TikTok, as Wasim was referencing earlier. That's also more obscure platforms, whether that's Reddit, not that Reddit is obscure, or 4chan or others. These things can pop up anywhere. So making sure that it's not just traditional media platforms that you're keeping an eye on, but platforms across the board that are out there. And that can give you a sense of what conversations you do need to be prepared for, what potential attacks could come up, because the internet has a crazy imagination, and there are things out there that probably you wouldn't even think could be around the corner, that paying close attention to the online chatter can really help you be aware of and think through, look around corners, and get ready for any potential response, or, as Wesley mentioned, proactive actions that you can be taking before it even becomes a problem to lay the groundwork should it bubble up. I think, sadly, the tragedy with the United Healthcare CEO has really put brands on notice that this is not just a reputational threat, but it can be a matter of physical safety. So I think a lot of the comments or posts or conversations that might have been dismissed before are really being treated very seriously now. So again, I just reiterate, having that robust planning and monitoring in place day and night, not just during working hours. If anyone in comms got into this business thinking it was a 9 to 5, I have bad news. But these things do need to be caught and addressed quickly.
I was going to make a joke about the 9 to 5 thing, but there's no need to. You're absolutely right. I mean, every time I have a conversation like this, I invariably ask everyone who I'm speaking with, when do you sleep? You don't have to answer that, by the way. But I think it's probably a fair question. Amisha, I want to let you talk about this now, so please.
Sure, and I agree with Katrina. We need to be concerned, but not panic. If I can build on what we should do to be prepared, I think the first thing I would definitely say is really invest in upskilling your team, or finding the right talent. Like, gone are the days where you can just have an analyst who is off to the side sending you reports every week, or have an agency that's not deeply embedded. Your crisis comms analyst, whoever's social listening and monitoring, has to be connected into your team, because oftentimes, as they mentioned, as the folks on the call mentioned, sometimes you have to move fast. And that's coordinating across. You may have to reach out directly to the social platforms and, within minutes, reach out to security. And if your analyst is not upskilled and doesn't really understand how to do more sophisticated, robust listening, or how to connect the dots, then you can be missing red flags. And so I think really this goes back to investing in reputation management. It's so crucial during this time. I mean, we go back to the United Healthcare CEO. What came out of that felt like a full-on attack on all large corporations. And so likely folks on the call, everyone sort of felt this in some kind of way. And so it's not the same playbook if people are just sharing their opinions on your food product. When it comes to CEOs or any kind of executive, you have to, your sort of, your on the ground squad is your security team. It is also your platform reps, because a lot of these posts violate community guidelines. There are some unregulated platforms, as mentioned, but most platforms have reps that will take it down and minimize the threat. So you need to have a close connection point with them, and you just need to have like a coordinated effort so you aren't taken by surprise, and that's so important. And the last bit I'll add is it's important if you are, you may not be the analyst on the ground analyzing the conversation, but in your comms role, we all should be like really smart on the broader narratives, because from a proactive standpoint, then you can counsel your C-suite on threat level for maybe proactive things that they may have planned. You know that, okay, this may not make sense in this environment because we're seeing across these, 3 platforms, this narrative start to form. And so really investing in, regardless of where you sort of fall in the chain, being smart on more broader narratives that are taking shape. All of those really do help your organization protect the C-suite and, like as the team mentioned, like get ahead of these issues.
Thank you for that, Amisha. And Wasim, I certainly don't want to leave you out of this part of the conversation. So do you have any thoughts?
Absolutely. So I would say in the last couple of months, our demand signal for narrative intelligence around executive protection has just gone through the roof, such that we're actively talking partnerships with what used to be traditional purview of the chief security officer, the CSO, who are looking at physical protection, but now adding narrative intelligence around executive protection to that risk profile and to that risk surface. I think if organizations are going to be honest with themselves, they have to have a very good sense of if they are a industry that is not all that well liked by the public. And that is the angle through which they have to look at how to handle those threats. Because in every organization, there's this tendency of, you're gonna kind of drink your own Kool-Aid and only hear the good. You have to understand if, whether it's dark web or on social, if there is a vitriolic narrative such that someone's willing to say spend the rest of their lives in prison to make a point, right? Unfortunately, that kind of thing is not going to decrease, right? So the more whipped up a society is, the more people you're going to have with access to grind. And I'm not going to point out industries here, but there are going to be certain industries that the public is just not that happy with right now. And so how are you going to really protect those executives, and by extension, your entire brand and your entire organization, if you don't know when that is starting to build, right? And then you have to connect that to narrative-driven and digital harm, to then real-world harm. Now, at Blackbird, we've really been talking about digital to physical harm for a long time. What we're hearing in the cybersecurity industry is those converging, right? So physical and cyber risk and the narrative risk are all starting to become part of the same threat surface. And that's why we see so many teams. Sometimes when we're talking to clients, it's amazing how many times it's the first time that the comms team and the threat intelligence team have ever met, right? Because typically they just weren't really working together, and now they know they have to work together to exchange that information. I think the last thing I would say here, just anecdotally, is that I had a conversation just a couple of weeks back with one of the probably most, well-known people in the cybersecurity industry, right? And one of the things that he said that he has been hearing is that shareholders of major publicly traded organizations are basically coming to their boards and telling them, if you don't get a handle on executive protection, whatever that means, the shareholders are going to fire the board, which is a good reason for companies to actually make sure that they're protecting their executives across the board, not just the CEO, but let's just say everyone whose comp packages are publicly available online, right? Because where does that anger really start today, right? So I would just say, if you don't have a handle on the narrative side of, when people are starting to get whipped up about your organization, you're kind of asking for something to happen on your watch. And that's why we see people very concerned about this. And I see a lot of positive moves in that direction to actually invest in new infrastructure. Remember, there are people talking as the CEO and as these executives on social without understanding any of the nuances that we're talking about here today. So they have to all be integrated, or it's bad news at some point. It's just not the last thing that'll happen, in the last couple of months.
Thank you for that, Wasim. Again, just so many important things for our audience to think about. I really appreciate all that. Couple of things. One, you guys are sending in a lot of questions. Very much appreciated. I already know we're not going to be able to get to a lot of them today. So like I said, we will answer them off Blackbird.AI. We'll answer them offline afterwards. So please keep sending in questions. They will be answered. Maybe not during today's webcast, but they will be answered. So please do keep sending them in. I also said that if a question came in that I thought was well timed from the audience, I might sort of interrupt my script and kind of get to it. So I actually there's a few I'd like to ask right now, but I'm not going to do that to you guys. But I do have one. Just bear with me for 1 second. This is live TV, folks, so I just have to find it here real quick. Here it is. Okay, so Katrina, believe it or not, this is actually addressed to you, but I have no doubt that Amisha and Wasim could probably answer it. Fairly straightforward question. How do you combat false narratives or manipulated narratives without inadvertently amplifying them further? Of course, you don't want to bring more attention to it, but you want to correct anything that's false or manipulated about your brand. It's an interesting balancing act. How do you do it, Katrina?
Well, every situation is definitely different. I think, there are nuances to how you want to approach things. I think one of the things is understanding at what level something has to reach that you would address it in a more public forum. Going back to one of the examples I was referencing about the fake images on social media, during the election, we kept a really close eye on that. We didn't actually end up issuing any sort of broad sweeping public statement about it because it was a fairly isolated community that this was bouncing around in. But we were watching it very closely. We had a lot of internal discussions about, like, do we post a statement on social media? Do we issue a statement to press? But we were aware that just, to the question's point, would draw attention to this that a lot of people might not have seen because they weren't necessarily in those forums where this was being discussed. So you do have to use some judgment in these situations and recognize, what is a bit more isolated, but you need to monitor and decide what the threshold is that it would have to reach for you to be more vocal in addressing it. I think, again, that's why it's important to have these advanced plans in place and know where that threshold lies.
No, I really, really appreciate that. In the interest, I can't believe we're almost 40 minutes into this conversation already. So I am going to move on. I'm going to go back to our questions. But again, guys, keep sending them in. Like I said, if we don't get to them during the 60 minutes, we'll get to them afterwards. So please keep sending them in. Some great questions coming in. Now, let's be honest. A lot of this conversation has been a little bit negative. And it's necessary, but it has been negative. I don't want this all to be gloom and doom here. So I'm going to bring a little positivity into our conversation now, okay? So what role do positive narratives and superfans play in strengthening a brand, and how can organizations harness this effectively? Amisha, I'm going to start with you because Katrina just did her thing, so I don't want to
sure,
pick on her. So Amisha, you're wearing Eagles green today, so superfans, Eagles.
Nice. I'm not an Eagles fan, but I'm supporting them. They're having a good year. So, I will say, we do live in a clickbait entertainment for environment. People tend to be stimulus rich and context poor. So it's important that as part of your proactive communication, you are giving them that context. You are proactively telling stories that illustrate your business. Why? We are at Nestlé the largest food and beverage company in the world. And so for us, that may be whenever we are stepping up and in during a natural crisis, or it may be how we are impacting in our community. You want to make sure you're keeping a steady drumbeat on those stories that do share why you do what you do. It could be like why you innovated a new product. Maybe there is a consumer need that has not been met. All of those things are really important, because if you think about the behavior journey, people start off on social, they hear a bad narrative, but then they go off from there and they may go Google or ask Gemini or ChatGPT, and you want to make sure whatever's on the record, your storefront, whether that's your corporate site or your social channels, that people can come back to get a single source of truth. So it's important to have, proactive storytelling and keep that updated. And then this is me giving the example from a corporate perspective, but even our brands play a role too, right? You have so many stories where brands are jumping in and solving everyday problems. Maybe it's like date night and the guy forgot, his wallet or something like that. And there's always those feel good stories on social where there's a character everyone wants to root for, and at times it makes sense for your brand to solve it. You want to be opportunistic on that, because those are authentic narratives that do carry, and they're ones that will resonate with audiences. And then the third point I'll make is you don't want to be the only one talking about how great you are. So at Nestle, we have a really robust employee ambassador program. And it gives our employees an opportunity to share our brand stories, talk about our impact on sustainability or in the community. And it's really just been incredible. So whether it's the partners you work with, or and bringing your employees in, you want to make sure like there is a surround sound element to it. And that all of those three elements, I think, are really important in driving a positive narrative.
Thank you for that, Amisha. And I'm so glad you mentioned employees, because they are I still believe employees are such an untapped resource by so many brands. They could be the best ambassadors that you have, perhaps even in combating some of these manipulative narratives that we're talking about. So really, really glad you mentioned that. See, this is why I wanted you on this conversation, Amisha. I knew you'd have gems like that. I appreciate it. Wasim, obviously, you have wonderful advice on so many things. So I want you to talk a little bit about positive narratives and how organizations can harness them effectively, in your opinion.
Yeah, sure. So, I think it's about resolution of what you can actually see in the information ecosystem with the right kinds of technology when compared with social listening. So if you want to really see what the positive narratives are, it makes sense that you need to see all of the signals around like things like manipulation and things of that nature that we've been talking about. So how are you going to understand what the really positive narratives are, or the harmful narratives, if your systems can't tell the difference between where the bots are? I mean, for example, there are bot networks that amplify positive narratives for particular reasons, say your competitors or whatnot. So in order to really leverage your kind of, let's say, we think of it as like advocates and super fans, right? That's how we think of it when we do work for our customers. Get those narratives that those advocates and super fans are involved in, but you may not be utilizing in the right way to get those authentic voices that can give you that groundswell that I was talking about earlier, positive groundswell. How can you then help to bring those to light or engage with those super fans or advocates that are already driving the kind of messaging that's going to be beneficial for your organization? So basically, it's about detecting where you have these organic allies, and those can also be very helpful in countering harmful narratives, which is another benefit of being able to have the resolution to see where they live and what they're actually driving. I think another, just thing, if I was going to speak to it, it's maybe about highlighting what might come as an authentic success story for the brand, right? And also being able to see narratives that align with that very early when they're starting, things that say align with your values, or whether it's a sustainability effort, some sort of community outreach you've been trying to do that's starting to take hold. Being able to see beyond just mentions and keywords and see when there's narratives that are building that are again going to help build a reservoir of goodwill for the organization. So that's how I really think about it. And why are positive narratives important in the world of narrative intelligence? That might be just one thing to hit. Well, positive narratives are like a force field, like a protective buffer for the harmful things that might actually be coming about, right? Again, your super fans are authentic amplifiers, know where they live, know how to engage with them the right way, so you don't turn them off. This is something we call really cultural intelligence, understand those super fans and their culture and why it really works for some brands and not others, and just being able to harness all that for positive business impact.
Wow, there are so many different kinds of blank intelligence that communicators need to have these days. Oh boy, I don't envy you guys. You guys have a tough job, but I know Amisha and Katrina are great at it, and what seems great too. So appreciate that. One other term that has become like you know table stakes for communicators is real time. Okay, everything's got to be in real time. Okay, now the conversation that we're having today and the stakes that we're talking about really make it apparent how important responding in real time is. And I want to get into that right now with this question. Real time response, it's not easy. But again, with the scenarios that we're focused on today, it's not only particularly challenging, it's also particularly crucial. So, how do communications leaders and security teams collaborate? And yes, as we've established today, they are collaborating now more than they ever have before. But how do they collaborate to monitor and address emerging harmful narratives in real time? That's something that is, I know it's not easy, but it's such a crucial thing that communicators have to do today. So, Katrina, you're probably not going to like me for starting with you, but yeah, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, good. I'll take it. I'll take it. Look, that knowing again who the stakeholders are, who you need to loop in from security. Somebody said it earlier, but sometimes that is the first time that the comms team is interacting with that group. So for better or worse, making sure that you know who to go to is really crucial. I think that also, establishing who, the chain of command, who's deciding, who do you need sign off from? A lot of times, things, even in these situations, once you have to loop in legal, that can add a whole other layer of complexity to how you're responding to something. So knowing who to go to and getting that done really quickly is really important. I think that, depending on the nature of the incident or the threat or, whatever is going on too, the point that Amisha raised earlier about having the right contacts within the platforms is also crucial, because sometimes that can, immediately mitigate what is going on. If you determine that something is fake, it's, bot driven, bad actor, et cetera. Having those relationships within the different platforms to have that flagged, have that removed very quickly is really important. So again, making sure that you're able to connect the dots before something happens will help you be able to respond more quickly in the moment, if and when, God forbid, it does.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And Amisha, I would like your counsel on this too.
Yeah, I would just say, we all know there's a lot of noise out there, and we historically are not used to working with security teams. So I think it's just to build on what was said, really upskilling each other. They have blind spots that you may not have, and you have blind spots that they may not have. So the more you can information share, so you can quickly identify, like, this is noise, this is a early indicator of a threat. I think the better off you will be. You really need to have like a speed dial relationship with your security team. And you can't spend your whole day doing it. So that's why, like, really getting a process in place and really kind of, as I mentioned, upskilling each other will help you move more efficiently to identify like real imminent threats.
Mm-hmm. Wasim, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you for your counsel as well.
Yeah, for sure. So, this is something we've been almost requesting our customers to be doing for probably the past 5 years, which is get the comms teams and the threat intelligence teams to sit in the same room if at all possible, but at least be talking to each other every day, exchanging data, looking at the same feed for critical alerts. The reason like this is so important, it's two-way, right? Sometimes, what might start as a cybersecurity or threat intelligence incident ultimately ends up in the lap of the communicators to protect the brand. So that's something where there has to be communication occurring. And on the flip side of that, comms professionals are not in the purview of dealing with cyber criminals and state actors that have spent billions of dollars trying to devise tradecraft to destroy an organization or to massively profit from it, right? Now, it just so happens that those two teams together can actually cover that entire threat surface if they are integrated. The thing that I've seen that's heartening is, at least at the higher end of like the larger companies, we're like talking to this one company that do like, it's like $100 billion plus company, but there are also many companies smaller that are starting to build these fusion centers, right? And the fusion centers often start small. Maybe it's a half dozen or a dozen people, but one of the customers we're working with right now, they're trying to design it so that there's at least two people literally sitting in chairs that can swivel around on a threat intelligence platform, media monitoring platform, narrative intelligence platform, and be able to rapidly exchange notes when something that is substantial actually starts to happen. So this is really about what many business practices have done in the face of a new threat or a new market shift, is how do you get to like cross-functional alignment within the organization with the teams that actually know what to do, who have the collaborative playbooks in two directions or three directions to be able to all merge all of that human intelligence with, say, AI-driven intelligence, and be able to get, again, to decision dominance in a rapidly, evolving situation, right? So it's really about going from this kind of reactive damage control mindset to proactive resiliency. And I think that's where everyone needs to live, from the executives down in the narrative space going into this year and beyond.
Absolutely. And, I know that the counsel the three of you have given has been really, really good because of the volume of the questions that we've gotten from the audience. And I'm going to say this again. I know I can't even get close to getting to all of them. So we are going to answer them offline. But you know what? With the few minutes that we have left on today's webcast, I think I do want to transition over to an audience question. Katrina, believe it or not, I got another one that was directed to you. And this is about, I'll just read it verbatim, actually. I'd love to hear more from Katrina about how Verizon manages its 24-hour social listening function. And is it all in-house? And are there any recommendations on how to bring this to life from brands that don't yet have 24/7 coverage? And Verizon probably has a reasonable-sized communications team. If I'm wrong, please don't say I'm wrong. That'll make me look bad. But you have a reasonable-sized communications team.
It's reasonably sized. Yes.
Yeah. A lot of people out there don't have that, but the problem exists for them just as much. So, how do you manage your 24/7 social listening apparatus? I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, for sure. It's a great question. And I come from a background where I did not have a reasonably sized communications team. So I've seen both sides of it and can appreciate where the question's coming from. I will say, in our current setup, it is not all managed in-house. It's just not feasible. And I can appreciate that, for different brands, depending on the size of your organization and your team, you're probably in the same boat where it's just not something that you're able to completely take on, but you also might not have the budget to bring on partners to do this externally. So what I would say is that, just because you can't necessarily bring on an external partner and be on the clock 24/7, there are still tools that can be leveraged that, even just basic Google alerts, sometimes it sounds very basic, but the things that you should take advantage of what you do have access to. And, it's something that, there are ways to make sure that those are being flagged to you in real time. Obviously, if something happens at 3 a.m. and you are the sole comms person for your organization, that's not always going to be possible to catch. But I do think, again, just making sure that you have some system in place to be regularly checking in, monitoring, hearing what the buzz is. You might have a better indication if there is a situation that you do need to be more closely monitoring, that you might need to go to leadership and ask for additional resources because something is a threat that is impending, that's the best you can do. But I do think, I will, speaking for Verizon, we do have, partners who help us with this. It is not just the job of communications either. We work really closely with our marketing team, our customer service team. There are multiple groups involved in this. And monitoring different platforms and a system in place for escalating when needed. So completely empathize with those, but there, I guess my counsel would be, take advantage of the tools that you do have access to as much as possible.
Thank you for that, Katrina. And you know what I took from that is that you are telling people 3 o'clock in the morning you should be sleeping. So that's good. That's good counsel.
I would encourage it whenever possible. Yes.
Very, very good. Amisha, while the question was directed to Katrina, I believe you have a reasonably sized team as well. And I'd love to hear how you guys handle your 24/7 social listening apparatus too.
I will say automated alerts will save your life. Even if you have a robust analytics team in-house and support from an agency, most folks are sleeping at 3 a.m. And so whether it's Google alerts or, setting up automated alerts into your social listening platform, that is a critical feature you want to have readily available, in addition to what your team is doing during business hours. That is critical.
Thank you for that. Now, I'm going to answer an audience question really, really quickly because someone asked if this is going to be available for people to listen to later. The answer is yes. This webcast is going to be available on demand for a year from today, so you can definitely check it out again. You'll get a recording of it if you're listening today or registered for today. So yes, you will be able to do all that. So I was able to answer a question myself. Now, this has been an incredible conversation, and I think this is where I want to end it with the few minutes that we have left. Sort of wrap everything up because we talked about a lot today. We covered a lot today. So based on today's discussion, what one piece of counsel, the one you deem most important or most impactful, would you recommend to our listeners to better protect their executives and brands from manipulated narratives? And I know one piece of counsel is probably difficult, but if there was one thing you could settle on, one thing you want people to leave today's webcast with, what would it be? And I want all three of you to answer that. And, I don't know why. It seems like I've always had Katrina at the top of my list. So, Katrina, I'm going to ask you first again.
Lucky me. No, look, I think what I would say is probably this is all of our responsibility. Don't just look to the person who has crisis communications or reputation management in their title. If you see something, say something, and don't be intimidated. As communications and PR professionals, our reality is that we are always either coming up with positive narratives or combating negative narratives. So how to do this. Don't be intimidated, and just be willing to be part of the solution.
Awesome, thank you for that, Amisha. What is the one piece of advice that you would offer our listeners?
I would say it's really truly an art, not a science, and so it's important not to overreact. Given the constant shifting news cycle and viral videos, it's important that you know how to take a beat and go back to your plans and assess. Don't be quick to take action on everything, because if you do that, engagement can at times make things worse. So really make sure that you are not overreacting or overcorrecting as you are wading through issues. You want to be prepared, but you don't want to be sort of quick to move with swift action on everything that arises.
Appreciate that. Wasim, obviously, I want to give you the last word on this. What piece of counsel would you like, if there was one that you would like our listeners to leave with from today, what would it be?
I mean, drafting off of what was just said here on not overreacting, or rather having the right reaction at the right time. I always say that in today's narrative space, know the signals that you're looking for, how to find them at the right time, at the right place. And specifically, three things: Do you understand how fast the narrative is growing across all of the different platforms you need to have observability into? Do you understand when there is manipulation within those narratives via bot networks, state actors, etc.? And do you understand specifically which actor types are amplifying the narratives that are harmful or positive for you? And if you can do those things fast and well, then you're going to be able to have the ability to make the right decisions at the right time. I think that's what's most critical. And our tagline, by the way, is know the narrative. So that's the short version of what everyone really needs to always be on top of.
Thank you for that, Wasim. And what I think the narrative from today is this. This was an awfully good webcast. I kind of knew it would be with the three of you, but you even surpassed my lofty expectations. So I want to thank you for that. And can't believe the hour went by just like that. But on behalf of PR Week, as well as our audience, I sincerely thank Blackbird.AI for sponsoring today's event. And of course, much gratitude to Wasim, Amisha, and Katrina for taking time from their very busy schedules to join us today and share their vast expertise. I also thank all of you, our audience. I truly appreciate your participation today. Hope you got as much out of this webcast as you were hoping, if not more. I want to take this opportunity to remind you to take the exit poll that will be available to you as soon as we sign off today in about a minute. If you take it, you'll be entered into a drawing for a $100 Amazon gift card courtesy of Blackbird.AI. Your answers are so important to us, so please do take it. I also want to note again to all the questions that we didn't get to during the 60 minutes, and there were a lot of them, we are going to answer as many of them as we can offline, and we're going to do it in a pretty short amount of time. So definitely know that if you ask a question, we're going to try to get to it. Please know that. Today's webcast will remain available on demand for a year, so you can revisit it and certainly tell others who did not attend today to do so. And of course, I welcome you all back to check back on prweek.com/US for future webcasts as well as previous ones on demand. But for now, on behalf of PR Week and Blackbird.AI, thank you for attending this webcast strategy session. Protect your brand from manipulated narratives. Until next time, this is Gideon Fiddleside wishing you all the best. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.